The pressure was mounting on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The whispers had turned into loud accusations, corruption, bribery, and illegal dealings. For months, she had been under investigation by federal authorities, and now it was finally catching up to her. If convicted, she could face years behind bars. AOC, the rising star of progressive politics, was now staring down the barrel of a political and personal nightmare. Her popularity had skyrocketed after being elected to Congress, but that same fame had now become her worst enemy. Critics who once hailed her as a champion for the people now painted her as a political pawn, and rumors about her alleged involvement in shady deals spread like wildfire. The weight of the situation began to sink in. The scandal had spread across news outlets, social media, and even to the streets of Washington, D.C., where citizens and politicians alike were beginning to question her integrity. And she knew one thing for sure. If she didn't act fast, she could be facing a jail cell. With each passing day, the reality of her situation grew more imminent. There was no escaping it anymore. The pressure was unbearable. Would her career be over before it even really started? Would the public's perception of her change forever? What was the last-ditch effort she could make to save herself from the inevitable? In the quiet of her office, alone and with the weight of the world on her shoulders, AOC looked out the window. There was no easy way out. But there had to be a way, right? Her phone buzzed on the desk. It was her lawyer. It was time to make a move. A final move. AOC's fingers trembled slightly as she picked up the phone, her lawyer's name flashing across the screen. She took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to hear could either be her last hope or her final downfall. Alexandria, her lawyer's voice crackled on the other end, sounding strained and hurried. I've just spoken to the federal investigators. They're closing in on you fast. We need to make a move, and we need to make it now. The urgency in his voice sent a cold shiver down her spine. She had expected nothing less, but hearing it confirmed made the situation feel even more real. She could almost hear the ticking of a clock in the background, each second bringing her closer to losing everything. What can we do? AOC asked, her voice surprisingly steady despite the storm raging in her mind. Her lawyer paused for a moment before responding. There's one option left, but it's risky. We could try to get ahead of the investigation and use your political connections to spin this situation in your favor. We could leak a piece of evidence, something small but convincing, to show the public that you were just a victim of a larger conspiracy. The aim would be to shift the blame away from you. She bit her lip, weighing the possibilities. AOC had built a career on being the voice of the people, the crusader against corruption, the champion of transparency. Could she sacrifice that reputation to save herself? Would she be able to live with the consequences if she resorted to manipulation? I don't know, she muttered, unsure whether she could bring herself to play such a dangerous game. But the thought of being locked away in a prison cell, her career shattered, her future over, was too much to bear. You don't have a choice, her lawyer pressed. This is the last chance. If we don't act, they will bury you with this. The weight of his words hit her hard. This was it, the point of no return. She had to decide in this moment. Would she take the risk and play dirty, or would she let the chips fall where they may? AOC closed her eyes, her mind racing. As the phone call ended, AOC was left with a sinking feeling in her stomach. The decision was made. She had to act swiftly and without hesitation. The plan was dangerous, and there was no turning back once she made her move. Her first step was to meet in secret with one of her most trusted political allies, a senior member of the Senate who owed her favors. He was known for his backroom deals and ability to sway public opinion. If anyone could help her pull this off, it was him. AOC didn't have much time. The feds were already circling, and if she wasn't careful, they would catch wind of the plan before she had a chance to execute it. She arrived at a secluded cafe in Washington, its windows tinted to keep out prying eyes. The meeting was brief but intense. She explained the situation and laid out the details of the strategy her lawyer had suggested. Her ally listened carefully, weighing the risks. This could backfire terribly, Alexandria, he warned. If we make the wrong move, you could lose everything. Not just your career, but your freedom. AOC's eyes flashed with determination. She had already lost so much. She wasn't going to let a few more risks stop her now. I don't have a choice. I need you to help me get ahead of the story and control the narrative. The longer they have the upper hand, the more they'll dig. We need to strike first. The senator nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. All right, I'll make the calls. We'll leak something small but credible, but it has to be timed perfectly. We need to release just enough to make it seem like you were manipulated, but not enough to suggest your direct involvement. As they spoke, AOC could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She had just taken a massive risk. If everything went according to plan, she could salvage her reputation and stay out of jail. But if it didn't, the consequences could be catastrophic. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls, messages, and last-minute preparations. AOC's heart raced as she waited for the right moment to release the carefully crafted piece of evidence, a small but damning detail that would make her appear innocent in the eyes of the public. It wasn't much, but it was enough to create doubt. The clock ticked relentlessly as the final details of the plan were ironed out. OC sat anxiously in her office, the walls closing in around her as the weight of her decision continued to bear down. Her ally had done his part, making the strategic calls, and now it was time for the information leak. Her phone buzzed in her hand, and she quickly opened the message. It was a press release, carefully written and crafted to plant just enough doubt in the minds of the public. A simple but powerful statement, claiming that AOC had been misled by senior officials and unaware of the full scope of the alleged illegal activities. It was the perfect angle, one that could allow her to distance herself from the scandal while still maintaining her political credibility. Without wasting a second, she approved the release. Moments later, news outlets across the country began reporting on it, their headlines filled with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. AOC unknowingly involved in scandalous plot? Evidence surfaces. At first, everything seemed to go according to plan. The media, eager for new revelations, seized on the story. Social media exploded with speculation, and the public was divided. Some believed her claims of innocence, while others saw it as a desperate attempt to save face. The conversation quickly shifted from AOC's alleged involvement in the scandal to the question of who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes. Was she truly a pawn, or was she hiding something bigger? But then, as the hours passed, things started to take a turn. The leak, which was supposed to buy her time, instead opened a whole new can of worms. The media quickly began digging deeper, finding inconsistencies in her story. The carefully orchestrated leak, which had seemed foolproof, started to unravel. Experts weighed in, questioning the credibility of the claims. They pointed out that the timeline didn't add up, and that the idea that AOC was unaware seemed increasingly implausible. The public's doubts began to grow, and the more they questioned, the more pressure mounted on her. By the evening, what had started as a clever attempt to save her career had quickly become a full-blown crisis. The story was no longer about AOC being misled. It was about her trying to manipulate the truth. Instead of controlling the narrative, she had only fueled it. Her phone rang again, and this time it was her lawyer. "Alexandria, we've got a problem," he said, his voice urgent. "The FBI is preparing to issue a subpoena. They've already connected the dots. We need to move quickly. If we don't act fast, this will all come crashing down." AOC's stomach twisted. She had thought she was one step ahead, but now it felt like the walls were closing in. What was supposed to be a strategic maneuver was quickly spiraling out of control, and she had no idea how to stop it. The weight of the situation was suffocating. With the FBI on her trail and the press smelling blood, OC knew she had no more time to waste. The carefully constructed facade was cracking, and her political career was teetering on the edge. She had never been in a position like this before, cornered, exposed, and unsure of who to trust. With trembling hands, AOC reached for her phone and dialed the one person she hoped could help her out of this mess, her top advisor, Olivia. Olivia had been a key figure in AOC's rise to power, the person who helped her navigate the political labyrinth, make the right deals, and handle the press. But even Olivia was starting to distance herself after all the scandals. "Olivia, it's bad," OC's voice cracked as she spoke. "The leak? Everything's falling apart. The media's turning on me, and the FBI's getting closer. I need help. I need to fix this now." On the other end, Olivia's voice was steady, but there was an underlying tension. "You should have thought of that before you leaked that information," she said bluntly. "But I'll be honest with you, this is bigger than I thought. We need to control the narrative fast, or it's game over." OC felt the panic rising again, her heart racing. I know. I thought if I could buy some time, get ahead of the story, That was a mistake, Olivia interrupted. You made a move without thinking it through. Now we need to get ahead of this, or it will spiral into something we can't undo. First things first, we need to stop the media from pushing the narrative that you're a victim. That's not going to work anymore. You're going to have to own up to your involvement. AOC felt a lump form in her throat. Owning up to anything felt like the last thing she could do. She had always prided herself on being a political mastermind, someone who could handle every crisis, turn every situation to her advantage. But now, she could feel her grip on control slipping away, and the pressure was unbearable. I can't do that, AOC murmured, almost to herself. If I admit anything, they'll charge me. I'll be finished. My career, my reputation, everything is on the line. Olivia was silent for a moment before speaking again, her voice more solemn. Then we have to prepare for the worst. If you're not ready to take the fall, you need to find a way to discredit the investigation. You need to turn the FBI's focus elsewhere. And fast. AOC clenched her fist, determination flickering in her eyes. She wasn't ready to let go of her career. Not like this. She would fight back, and she would do it in a way that no one would see coming. All right, she said, her voice cold and steely now. I'll need you to set up some calls. I have a plan. We're not backing down. Olivia sighed. If this backfires, AOC, it's over. You're playing with fire. AOC's grip on the phone tightened. Then I'll get burned. But I won't go down without a fight. AOC sat in her office, her mind racing with ideas. She was no stranger to political maneuvering, but the stakes had never been this high. The FBI investigation, the leaks, the media frenzy, it was all coming to a head, and she needed a way out, something to change the narrative in her favor. As she stared at her desk, a thought struck her. She had one card left to play, something no one would see coming. She had been careful, playing the long game all along, keeping one final move up her sleeve. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was Olivia again. AOC, you listening? Olivia's voice was tight with urgency. The situation is about to go public. If you don't act fast, you'll lose all control. You have to step up and take charge now. AOC's mind clicked into overdrive. The gears were turning, the pieces falling into place. I know exactly what I need to do, she replied, her tone a mix of determination and quiet resolve. I'll leak information to the press, information that throws the entire FBI investigation into question. If we can make the FBI look like they're overreaching, it'll make it harder for them to push any charges. Olivia paused, sensing the shift in AOC's demeanor. Are you sure about this? If you're wrong, if it doesn't work, the backlash will be catastrophic. I'm sure, AOC said, leaning back in her chair, her mind already visualizing the next steps. This is the last thing I can do to protect myself. I've got one final card, and it's about time I played it. The phone call ended abruptly, and AOC sat there, her fingers tapping nervously against the wood of her desk. She was about to set something in motion that could either save her career or destroy it completely. Her next move was daring, calculated, and dangerous. It involved a carefully orchestrated leak of sensitive information to a few trusted reporters who had always been sympathetic to her cause. This leak would paint the FBI as overzealous, making their investigation seem politically motivated, an attempt to bring down a rising star. If she could get the right journalists on board, she would create enough doubt in the minds of the public that the FBI's case would falter. She picked up the phone again and called her lawyer, a trusted confidant in the world of politics and media. Listen, I need you to help me out with something. I want you to arrange a meeting with a few reporters, off the record. We'll give them some leaked information that casts a shadow on the FBI investigation. We'll need them to run with it. I want the narrative to shift, and I need this to happen fast. Can you handle that? Her lawyer's voice crackled on the other end. This is a dangerous game you're playing, AOC. If the press finds out what you're doing, you could be facing charges of obstruction. I know the risks, AOC snapped. But I'm not going down without a fight. Do you want to help me or not? A long pause followed before the lawyer reluctantly agreed. I'll make the calls. Just be careful, AOC. Once you start this, there's no turning back. AOC's mind was already 2 steps ahead. She knew the risks, but she also knew that this was her best shot at staying in the game. If this plan succeeded, the FBI would be forced into a defensive position, unable to make further moves without causing a massive public outcry. But if it failed, if it backfired, she could kiss her career goodbye. With a deep breath, OC stood up, her hands steady now. She knew the storm she was about to unleash, but she was ready. This wasn't just about saving her career anymore. This was about taking back control, no matter the cost. The plan was in motion. AOC had been meticulous in choosing which journalists to leak the information to. They were reporters known for their critical stance against the FBI's overreach, those who would be quick to report any story that painted law enforcement in a negative light. These were journalists who had followed her from the beginning, always eager to amplify her message. She knew it was a gamble, but it was the only way to shift the narrative. She had to make the press believe that the FBI's investigation was less about justice and more about political retaliation. If the media ran with this, the public might turn their sympathy towards her, questioning the legitimacy of the charges and casting doubt on the motivations behind them. By midday, the first leak had already hit the wires. A trusted reporter from a popular news outlet had published an article detailing an incredibly biased internal FBI memo, suggesting that the investigation into AOC was politically motivated from the start. The leak claimed that certain high-ranking FBI officials had been pushing the case forward despite lack of evidence, making the case seem more like an attack on AOC than a legitimate legal pursuit. AOC watched from her office as the news began to spread. Her heart raced as the article picked up traction, being shared and discussed on social media. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a moment of relief. The public was starting to question the investigation, but this was just the beginning. She needed more momentum. Over the next few hours, another article broke, this time focusing on the alleged connections between key figures in the FBI and the political opponents of AOC. The article painted a picture of a carefully coordinated campaign to discredit her, showing how the investigation had been manipulated from within the Bureau. It was exactly what she had hoped for, a wave of public skepticism that would put the FBI on the defensive. AOC leaned back in her chair, trying to suppress the satisfaction that was creeping up her spine. She had orchestrated this. She had played her cards right, and for the first time in a long time, she could breathe. But the relief was short-lived. As the stories went viral, she received a text from Olivia, the woman who had been guiding her through this crisis. AOC, the media is eating this up. But you need to know, they're not the only ones watching. The FBI is going to react. And soon, AOC's fingers tightened around the phone. She knew Olivia was right. The FBI wasn't going to sit idly by while she tried to discredit their investigation. There would be a response, a counterattack. They would refute the leaks, call them baseless, and accuse her of fabricating stories to avoid responsibility. This was only the first wave. But for now, AOC focused on the storm she had just unleashed. It wasn't over yet. She had to keep pushing, keep the pressure on the FBI. She needed to make sure that the public didn't buy into their narrative, and more importantly, she needed to make sure that the investigation lost its momentum before it could completely destroy her. She dialed Olivia's number. "Make sure we keep this going," AOC said when Olivia picked up. "I want every leak we can get, every bit of information that paints the FBI as a political tool. We can't stop now. I need to keep them on the ropes." Olivia's voice came through the line, filled with concern. "You're playing a dangerous game, AOC. The more you push, the more they'll retaliate." "I know the stakes," AOC replied coldly. "But this is the only way to win. We fight fire with fire." The lines were drawn. The battle had shifted. The fight wasn't just about proving her innocence anymore. It was about dismantling the FBI's case before it could truly take hold. AOC hung up, staring out of her office window. She was about to embark on the most dangerous phase of this fight, but she was ready. She had no other choice but to keep going. As expected, the FBI didn't take long to respond. By the next morning, a formal press release was issued, calling the leaks false and misleading, and accusing AOC of attempting to sabotage the investigation. The Bureau declared that they had ample evidence to support their case, and that the leaks only represented a small group of disgruntled employees attempting to discredit their work. The statement also pointed out that the investigation was being conducted by independent prosecutors, not by politically motivated figures within the FBI. They dismissed AOC's claims as nothing more than a diversionary tactic. But the response didn't stop there. A few hours after the release, the FBI held a press conference in front of the building, with Special Agent Christopher Hall, one of the lead investigators in AOC's case, taking the stand. His voice was stern, filled with the authority of someone who believed that their cause was just. "We've seen this tactic before," Agent Hall said, looking directly at the cameras. "When a suspect is cornered, they try to shift the blame. They try to paint the law enforcement agencies as the enemy. But I want to make one thing clear. The investigation into Representative Ocasio-Cortez is not based on political motivations. It is based on facts, evidence, and the rule of law. And we will continue to pursue this case until it reaches its conclusion." AOC watched the press conference unfold on her television screen, her jaw clenched. She had anticipated this kind of response, but hearing it directly from the FBI's lead investigator still sent a chill down her spine. They weren't backing down. They were doubling down, trying to win back the narrative she had stolen from them the day before. But AOC wasn't about to let this happen. She knew that this was the moment to strike again, harder, faster, and more strategically. She couldn't afford to let the FBI regain control of the narrative. Not now. She quickly gathered her team, pulling them together in a war room-like setting. Phones were buzzing, laptops were open, and everyone was working feverishly. The clock was ticking. "We need a counter-narrative, and we need it fast," AOC said, her voice cold and determined. "We can't let the FBI's spin take root. We need something that'll hit them where it hurts." Her team scrambled, gathering everything from inside sources to leaked documents. They were going to find the truth behind the FBI's claims and use it against them. AOC knew that the FBI was hiding something big, and it was time to expose it. While her team worked, she turned to Olivia. "I need you to dig into Hall's past. There's something off about this guy. He's been pushing this case too hard. He's got a history, and we need to find it." Olivia nodded, her face determined. "I'll get on it right away." AOC's mind was racing. She could feel the walls closing in on her, but at the same time, she could sense the power of the public response growing. People were starting to listen. The press was starting to question the FBI's methods, and that was exactly what she needed. "We need to keep the pressure on," AOC said, looking at her team. "We can't let up now. The FBI may be big, but we've got the people on our side. And once we show them the truth, there's no way they can win." Her team nodded, knowing that AOC was right. They were about to go to war. And this time, they had no intention of losing. As AOC's battle with the FBI intensified, her allies in Congress began to rally behind her. Key figures in her party, senators and representatives, stood up to defend her, calling the investigation into her a politically motivated attack designed to silence one of the most prominent progressive voices in America. Senator Eleanor Matthews, a longtime ally and one of AOC's most trusted mentors, made a public statement expressing her concern about the direction of the investigation. "We cannot allow the FBI to target a sitting member of Congress based on manufactured evidence and fabricated leaks," Matthews said during a live broadcast. "This is an unprecedented move that threatens the very foundation of our democracy. The American people deserve better than this." The senator's words struck a chord with many Americans. Public sentiment began to shift as people questioned whether the FBI was indeed overstepping its bounds. Some of the more progressive news outlets echoed Matthews' concerns, while online forums and social media platforms exploded with debates about the investigation's fairness and its possible political motives. AOC's team was quick to seize this opportunity. They launched a coordinated campaign across multiple platforms, rallying support for AOC and pushing back against the narrative that the FBI had created. They shared stories, used viral hashtags, and brought in talking heads to argue that this was an attempt to undermine the will of the people, an effort to discredit one of the few politicians who truly represented the working class. This growing coalition of lawmakers, pundits, and activists provided AOC with a powerful counterforce against the FBI. It wasn't just about her now. It was about a broader struggle to protect democracy from an institution that some believed was being weaponized for political gain. The more support she gathered, the more confident she became that she could turn the situation around. But AOC was no fool. She knew that the FBI wouldn't back down simply because of public pressure. This fight wasn't just going to be about media battles or social justice. It was about something deeper, something more dangerous. If she wanted to come out on top, she needed to play the game in a way that no one expected. As she sat with her inner circle, she mapped out the next steps. "We've got momentum," she said, eyes hard with determination. "But we need to hit them where it hurts. We need to make them lose the public trust. One of her advisors, Jake, raised a key point. There's a big hole in their narrative. Hall's been pushing this case aggressively, but we haven't heard much from the higher-ups in the Bureau. We need to put pressure on them, not just the agents on the ground. AOC nodded. Exactly. I want to start focusing on the leadership at the top. Let's dig into their funding, their political connections, and their personal interests. We'll find something big, something that shows they're not as clean as they claim to be. The decision was made. AOC's team shifted its focus from just defending her to attacking the credibility of the FBI's leadership. They began tracking financial records, looking into the political donations of senior FBI officials, and investigating any ties that could suggest a conflict of interest or political bias. Meanwhile, AOC continued to speak out, holding press conferences and town halls where she passionately made the case that the FBI's actions weren't just unlawful, they were a direct assault on the American people's right to choose their leaders. The public outcry grew louder, and AOC's message began to resonate deeply with those who were frustrated by what they saw as an overreaching government. The FBI, in response, started to shift its strategy. No longer could they claim to be neutral in this case. They were now on the defensive. It was clear that AOC had become a force to be reckoned with, and the more she fought, the more dangerous she became to the Bureau's credibility. Now, with the country watching, both sides braced for what would come next, the inevitable clash of power that would determine not just AOC's future, but the future of the nation itself. And in that moment, AOC knew that she was more than just a politician fighting for her career. She was fighting for something bigger than herself, something that could alter the course of history. Just as AOC's team had begun to turn the tide, an unexpected bombshell dropped that sent shockwaves through the political landscape. A credible whistleblower from within the FBI came forward with explosive allegations. The whistleblower, who had been working in a senior position within the Bureau for years, claimed that several high-ranking officials had been manipulating evidence and withholding critical information in cases involving progressive politicians. The most damning claim was that the investigation into AOC was part of a larger, covert operation aimed at weakening the left-wing movement in the United States. This revelation sent the media into a frenzy. The story quickly went viral, and every major news outlet in the country was scrambling to cover the details of the whistleblower's claims. The whistleblower, whose identity was protected for safety reasons, provided an extensive list of documents and communications that seemed to corroborate the charges. It was clear that the FBI had not been entirely forthcoming about its role in the investigation, and there were now serious questions about its impartiality. AOC's legal team pounced on the story, immediately calling for a full investigation into the alleged corruption within the FBI. They pointed out that these new allegations not only put the agency's credibility at risk, but also raised the possibility that AOC had been unfairly targeted by powerful forces with political agendas. AOC, now more emboldened than ever, stood in front of the cameras and made a bold statement. "This isn't just about me anymore," she said, her voice steady but full of conviction. "This is about every American who believes in the fairness of our justice system. This is about standing up to corruption, wherever it hides, and demanding accountability from those who have been entrusted with our protection." The public reaction to AOC's words was overwhelming. People took to social media, rallying behind her and demanding that the FBI be held accountable. The hashtag FBI accountability trended for days, and grassroots movements across the country began organizing protests and petitions. The American people were no longer passive bystanders. They were actively engaging in the fight for justice. Meanwhile, the FBI was scrambling to contain the fallout from the whistleblower's revelations. The agency issued a statement denying any wrongdoing and promised an internal investigation into the claims. However, many saw this as a desperate attempt to save face, and the public skepticism only grew stronger. AOC's camp began to push for a special independent commission to oversee the investigation, arguing that the FBI could not be trusted to investigate itself impartially. Behind closed doors, tensions were running high. AOC's political rivals, who had previously dismissed her as a radical leftist, were now forced to rethink their strategy. The fallout from the scandal was far-reaching, and they knew that aligning with the FBI's narrative might now be politically disastrous. Meanwhile, AOC's allies in Congress were ready to go on the offensive. They saw this as an opportunity to push for greater transparency in government agencies and reform the justice system to ensure that no one, not even the FBI, could abuse their power for political gain. But as the story unfolded, new developments raised even more questions. The whistleblower revealed that they had been in contact with certain political figures who were believed to be sympathetic to AOC's cause. This revelation made it clear that the stakes had been raised. This was no longer just about AOC's fight for justice. It was a full-scale battle against an institution that many now saw as too powerful and too entrenched to be held accountable. With mounting pressure from the public and a growing number of politicians calling for reform, AOC knew that she had reached a critical juncture. The next steps would be crucial. She needed to stay ahead of the curve, keeping the pressure on the FBI while pushing her message of transparency and accountability. But she also understood that the longer this dragged on, the more it would hurt the FBI's reputation and its ability to function effectively. As AOC prepared to face the next wave of challenges, she was resolute in her belief that the fight for justice was far from over. The political machine had thrown everything it could at her, but now she was the one in the driver's seat, and she had no intention of backing down. It was clear that the next few weeks would be critical in determining whether she would ultimately be vindicated or whether the FBI's long-standing power would finally be exposed for all to see. As the weeks passed, AOC's legal team put together a groundbreaking strategy to counter the FBI's attempts to discredit her and the growing public backlash. They began to prepare for a high-stakes legal battle that could set a precedent for future cases involving abuse of power by government agencies. AOC's lawyers, having been buoyed by the public outcry and the whistleblower's revelations, decided to file a civil lawsuit against the FBI for illegal surveillance and infringement of her constitutional rights. This was not just a defensive measure to clear her name. It was an all-out offensive aimed at dismantling the agency's credibility in the eyes of the public. Her legal team carefully crafted the lawsuit, ensuring it wasn't just focused on her case, but also on holding accountable those who had been complicit in the broader conspiracy to undermine the political left. They called it the People's Justice Initiative, arguing that the FBI's actions were part of a larger systemic issue of governmental overreach, one that affected not only AOC but every American citizen. They knew the stakes were high. If they lost, it would not only harm AOC's political career, but could also embolden other governmental bodies to continue acting with impunity. But if they won, it could completely shift the balance of power in the country, forcing a rethinking of the relationship between political leaders and law enforcement. The timing was critical. With public sentiment on her side, AOC's team began to build a legal narrative that painted her as a victim of a corrupt and overreaching government. They even brought in experts to testify about historical examples of law enforcement agencies targeting political dissidents, setting a precedent that no one in modern America was above reproach. The pressure on the FBI intensified, and behind the scenes, the agency's leadership knew they had to act quickly. Rumors swirled that AOC's team was preparing to launch an investigation into the FBI's handling of previous high-profile cases. The fear was palpable. If the lawsuit went forward, it could open up a Pandora's box of corruption, misconduct, and abuses of power that would cripple the agency for years to come. AOC, for her part, maintained her focus. As the media's scrutiny grew, she became the face of a movement that transcended her own legal troubles. People from all walks of life rallied behind her, with grassroots organizations demanding the government take responsibility for its actions. AOC wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every American citizen who felt powerless against the enormous weight of the government. The media's coverage of AOC's legal team was glowing, praising their strategy and expertise. Some even speculated that this could be the moment when the balance of power in Washington would shift. If she succeeded, it could create a new political reality, one where no public official, no matter how powerful, would be safe from scrutiny. Despite the growing momentum, the FBI and its supporters weren't backing down. They launched their own counteroffensive, accusing AOC and her legal team of manipulating the public and using the case to push a partisan agenda. However, every attempt to derail the lawsuit only seemed to strengthen the public's perception that the FBI was acting out of self-preservation rather than a genuine desire for justice. As AOC's lawsuit began to take shape, more bombshells were dropped. Key figures from inside the FBI began to speak out against the agency, confirming AOC's allegations of political targeting. Several senior officials who had initially stayed silent were now testifying that they had been pressured by higher-ups to go after AOC due to her outspoken political views. AOC's legal team, sensing an opening, immediately called for a full independent investigation into the FBI's practices, arguing that it was essential to expose the agency's covert operations against political opponents. Public opinion was squarely behind her, and the demands for transparency reached a fever pitch. The FBI, realizing that they could no longer contain the damage, finally made a statement that many saw as a desperate attempt to salvage their reputation. They announced that they were suspending several high-ranking officials involved in AOC's case pending further investigation. However, this move did little to quell the public outrage. It seemed like the FBI was only making token gestures in an attempt to save face, rather than genuinely addressing the deep-seated issues within the agency. AOC's legal team, however, wasn't about to let them off the hook so easily. As the lawsuit moved forward, the public pressure on the FBI continued to mount. It became clear that the agency's credibility was on the line, and its leaders knew that the future of the organization was in jeopardy. As the case moved into its most pivotal phase, the media frenzy surrounding AOC and the FBI reached a fever pitch. News outlets, both conservative and liberal, began to cover the situation nonstop. Talk shows, social media, and news broadcasts were consumed by debates about whether AOC was truly the victim of a corrupt system or whether she was manipulating the public for political gain. The situation became a spectacle, and every small development was dissected for hours on end. Journalists from all over the world showed up to report on the case, and the courthouse became a media circus. AOC was no longer just a congresswoman. She had become a symbol of resistance for those who felt marginalized by the government and its agencies. With every courtroom appearance, her legal team garnered more supporters, while the FBI's reputation continued to erode. Experts were brought in to testify about the potential abuse of power by federal agencies, and some even drew parallels to past political scandals in American history. The American public was glued to the unfolding drama, and the courtroom became a stage for larger ideological battles. AOC supporters flooded social media, using hashtags like #JusticeForOC and #FBIOverreach. The posts shared news, memes, and videos, building momentum behind the idea that this case could be a turning point in American politics. The more the FBI tried to discredit AOC, the more they appeared to be hiding something, fueling the fire of suspicion in the minds of the public. On the other side, the FBI's allies in the media launched a counteroffensive, accusing AOC of playing the victim and using the case to further her own political agenda. They painted her as an opportunist, someone who was using the legal system to escape the consequences of her actions. But this narrative did little to sway the growing number of people who were rallying behind AOC. AOC herself remained calm amidst the storm. She had become adept at navigating media interviews, consistently turning the tables on reporters who tried to catch her off guard. She was no longer just defending herself. She was speaking for a generation of Americans who felt like their voices were being ignored by the establishment. The more she spoke, the more her message resonated with those who believed the system needed to change. As the media circus continued, the pressure on the FBI intensified. Every misstep, every public comment made by FBI officials only added to the perception that they were out of control and unaccountable. It became clear that the FBI was losing the battle for public opinion, and the more they tried to defend themselves, the more they seemed to dig themselves into a deeper hole. In the midst of this chaos, AOC's team uncovered a crucial piece of evidence that would change the entire trajectory of the case. It wasn't just the whistleblower's testimony or the documents they had already obtained. It was a direct link between the FBI's higher-ups and political figures who had a vested interest in undermining AOC's career. This was the smoking gun they had been waiting for. When AOC's legal team revealed this new evidence during a press conference, the story exploded. The public was stunned by the revelations, and the FBI had no choice but to respond. This was the moment that many had been waiting for, the moment when the truth finally came to light. The FBI's response was swift but ineffective. They denied the accusations and dismissed the evidence as circumstantial, but the damage was already done. With the public now questioning the integrity of the FBI, AOC's legal team pressed forward, demanding that the case be taken to trial. They had built a rock-solid case, and there was no turning back now. As the weeks went on, the legal battle took on greater significance. The case had become a proxy war for much larger ideological and political battles. It wasn't just about AOC anymore. It was about the future of American democracy and the role of powerful government agencies in shaping the political landscape. Would the FBI be held accountable for its actions, or would it remain the untouchable institution that it had been for decades? With the momentum on her side, AOC was poised to make history. But the stakes had never been higher. If she succeeded in exposing the FBI's misconduct and corruption, it could change the course of American history forever. And if she failed, it would send a message that no one, no matter how powerful, was safe from the long reach of government surveillance and intimidation. The final showdown was approaching, and AOC's team was ready for whatever came next. The courtroom would become the battleground, and the nation was watching to see who would come out victorious. Would AOC's fight for justice prevail, or would the FBI's years of unchecked power finally prove too strong to overcome? As the case reached its critical stage, the entire nation seemed to be holding its breath. Tension hung in the air as AOC's legal team prepared for the next pivotal phase of the trial. The stakes were incredibly high, not just for her but for the future of how American democracy would function. If AOC could prove that the FBI had overstepped its bounds and engaged in political manipulation, it could change the entire structure of how government agencies operated in the future. Every day, news outlets reported on the latest developments, and the drama unfolded on social media with millions of posts and hashtags. Every new detail, every leak was dissected and analyzed. Public opinion was sharply divided, with AOC supporters rallying behind her and the FBI's defenders continuing to claim that she was simply trying to avoid the consequences of her own actions. Yet, despite the noise, one thing was clear. AOC was becoming a symbol for those who believed that the system needed to be checked and balanced. In the courtroom, AOC's lawyers were relentless. They had already laid out the groundwork for their case, and the new evidence they had uncovered about political interference by powerful figures in the FBI was nothing short of explosive. They meticulously pieced together the connections between key individuals in the FBI and high-ranking political figures who had motives for wanting to discredit AOC. The evidence was irrefutable, and AOC's team was ready to unleash it. Meanwhile, the FBI found itself on the defensive. The agency was now under a microscope, with every action it had taken in the investigation being scrutinized. Each new piece of evidence AOC's team presented made it harder for the FBI to defend itself. Their credibility was rapidly crumbling, and they were running out of ways to justify their actions. As the trial moved forward, public opinion shifted. The once powerful FBI was now seen as a corrupt institution, trying to bring down a political figure who had dared to challenge the status quo. The tide was turning, and AOC supporters began to rally in larger numbers. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, chanting for justice and demanding that the FBI be held accountable for its alleged wrongdoing. AOC, for her part, maintained a composed and focused demeanor. She had learned to navigate the media circus with grace, and now she was using her platform to speak directly to the American people. She reminded them that this wasn't just about her, it was about the integrity of the system. If the FBI could target her in such an underhanded way, what was stopping them from doing the same to others? Her speeches and public appearances became a rallying cry for those who felt they had been silenced by the government. She promised that if she won, it would send a message to the world that no one, not even the most powerful institutions, was beyond the reach of justice. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Both sides knew that the final verdict would have monumental consequences. If AOC's legal team succeeded, it would be a monumental blow to the FBI's power and influence. It would show that the people, through the courts, could hold even the most powerful government agencies accountable for their actions. But if the FBI triumphed, it would send a message that the government could act with impunity, and anyone who opposed it could be crushed under the weight of its power. With each passing day, the case became less about AOC and more about the future of the American justice system. Would the country continue to let powerful institutions wield unchecked power, or would the rule of law prevail? Would justice be served, or would the system protect its own at the expense of the truth? As the days leading up to the trial's climax drew near, both sides knew they were on the brink of something historic. The nation was watching, and the outcome would have ramifications far beyond this one case. Everyone was wondering, could AOC truly bring down the mighty FBI, or would they manage to emerge victorious, their hold over the country unchallenged? The courtroom would soon become the battleground for the fate of the nation, and the tension in the air was almost unbearable. The question was no longer just about whether AOC would face charges, but whether the very foundations of American democracy would be altered forever. Would the truth finally be revealed? Or would the FBI's power prove unshakable, leaving the American people wondering if the system was truly broken beyond repair? As the final stages of the trial loomed, everyone could sense that the end was near, and that the moment of reckoning for both AOC and the FBI had finally arrived. The day the final evidence was to be presented, the courtroom was packed, the air electric with anticipation. AOC's legal team had been working tirelessly, gathering witnesses, documents, and making sure every detail was perfectly aligned for this moment. They had one last chance to expose the truth, and they were ready to deliver the final blow that could change everything. AOC sat at the defense table, calm but steely-eyed. She knew that this moment would either mark the end of her political career or set her on a path to becoming one of the most influential political figures in modern history. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and she was about to put everything on the line. The judge called the court to order, and the prosecutors stepped up to make their closing remarks, outlining their case against AOC and the charges that she had faced. As the prosecutor wrapped up, AOC's legal team took their turn. They had prepared a bombshell piece of evidence, an audio recording that would change the entire narrative of the case. The courtroom fell silent as AOC's lead attorney played the recording. It was a conversation between two high-ranking members of the FBI, discussing the manipulation of evidence and plans to discredit AOC for political gain. The recording revealed how top officials in the FBI had conspired to create a false narrative, with the sole intention of bringing down AOC and undermining her political career. The stunned silence in the courtroom was deafening. Even the judge seemed caught off guard. The moment had arrived, the very piece of evidence that would expose the FBI's manipulation and possibly ruin their credibility forever. The prosecution was visibly shaken. They had anticipated AOC's defense would be strong, but they hadn't expected this. The bombshell evidence had not only damaged their case, but also left them scrambling to understand how AOC's legal team had uncovered it. It was clear now that the FBI had played a much more significant role in the political interference than anyone could have imagined. The evidence had turned the case on its head, and the public perception of the FBI, which had once been untouchable, was now seriously in question. AOC supporters in the courtroom were on the edge of their seats, barely able to contain their emotions. Outside the courtroom, the media was going wild. News outlets quickly picked up the story, and within hours, social media was flooded with reactions. It was no longer just a legal battle, it was a full-blown scandal that could shake the foundation of American democracy. The fallout from the revelation was immediate. Investigations were launched into the FBI's actions, and calls for accountability were louder than ever. Politicians on both sides of the aisle began to question whether the FBI had abused its power and whether it had been used as a tool to settle political scores. As the story spread across the nation, the public's trust in the FBI and in the government as a whole began to erode. AOC supporters rallied behind her even more strongly, seeing her as a symbol of resistance against corruption. In speeches and interviews, she spoke passionately about the need to hold those in power accountable and to ensure that the government operated transparently and fairly for all citizens, not just the elite few. Her message resonated with people from all walks of life who had grown disillusioned with the political establishment. However, this shocking revelation did not mark the end of the battle. AOC still faced the possibility of charges, and the FBI's legal team would undoubtedly fight back with everything they had. But now AOC had the upper hand. She had exposed the corrupt system for what it was, and she wasn't going down without a fight. As the courtroom session wrapped up and the judge called for a recess, the media descended on AOC's legal team. Cameras flashed, and reporters shouted questions, eager to hear AOC's response to the bombshell evidence. AOC, ever poised, simply nodded and gave a brief statement, saying, "This is just the beginning. We must stand up to corruption, no matter where it comes from." The atmosphere in the courtroom was electric. People on both sides of the case knew that this was a turning point. AOC had just given the nation the proof it needed to understand what was really happening behind the scenes. But even as she left the courtroom that day, the battle was far from over. The war was just beginning, and the next phase would be even more critical. Would the FBI be held accountable? Could the evidence AOC had presented lead to the downfall of some of the most powerful figures in the country? The answers to these questions would soon become clear, but for now, one thing was certain: AOC had delivered the final blow. In the days following the bombshell revelation, the public outcry was immediate and overwhelming. News outlets across the country scrambled to report the details of the recording and its shocking contents. Social media exploded with hashtags calling for justice, transparency, and accountability, with users from all walks of life discussing the implications of the revelation. AOC's name was trending worldwide, not only for her role in uncovering the truth, but also for the political firestorm that was about to unfold. The once untouchable reputation of the FBI was now seriously tarnished, and calls for a full investigation into its actions had reached unprecedented levels. In Washington, the atmosphere was tense. Legislators from both parties were under pressure to respond to the allegations. Some rallied behind AOC, hailing her for exposing corruption at the highest levels of government, while others were more cautious, choosing to wait for the full facts before passing judgment. But the truth was clear. The political landscape in the United States had just shifted in a major way. AOC supporters were ecstatic, flooding her social media accounts with messages of admiration and praise. Many saw her as the only politician brave enough to stand up to the powerful elites and fight for justice, no matter the cost. Her approval ratings skyrocketed, and her political future looked brighter than ever, with speculation mounting that she could use this moment to launch a presidential campaign. However, AOC was not the only one in the spotlight. The FBI's actions were now under intense scrutiny, and investigations were launched into the agents involved in the scandal. AOC's legal team worked tirelessly to ensure that the corrupt individuals in the FBI were held accountable for their role in the plot to discredit her. Public hearings were scheduled, and whistleblowers within the FBI came forward, revealing even more damning evidence of misconduct. The fallout also extended to other government agencies, as more stories of political interference and unethical practices surfaced. It seemed that the revelations about the FBI were just the tip of the iceberg, and the nation's faith in the institutions meant to protect democracy was shaken to its core. But amidst the chaos, AOC remained calm and resolute. She knew that this was not just about her. This was about the integrity of the democratic system itself. She continued to speak out, pushing for reforms that would ensure that no one, regardless of their position or power, was above the law. Her calls for transparency, oversight, and accountability resonated with millions of Americans who had grown disillusioned with the status quo. Despite the mounting pressure on the FBI, AOC's opponents in the political world were quick to criticize her tactics. They accused her of using the scandal to further her own political ambitions and of turning a legal battle into a media circus. However, these critiques fell on deaf ears, as AOC's supporters saw her actions as a necessary step in exposing the truth and fighting for justice. The story quickly became a national narrative. The FBI's role in the scandal was dissected in every corner of the media, and every new piece of evidence uncovered was met with outrage and disbelief. The government's credibility was on the line, and the American people were demanding answers. With a spotlight on her, AOC prepared for the next stage of the battle, the public hearings and further investigations into the corruption at the heart of the FBI. She knew that this would be the defining moment of her political career. If she could navigate the minefield ahead, exposing the full extent of the conspiracy, she could not only clear her name but also restore the faith of the American people in their institutions. As the weeks passed, the pressure on the FBI grew, and more high-profile resignations followed. It became clear that the fallout from AOC's revelation was not just limited to one case. It was a systemic issue that would take years to fully resolve. The ripple effects would be felt for a long time, and the political landscape would never be the same. For AOC, this moment marked the beginning of a new chapter. She had taken on the establishment and won, but the war was far from over. The coming months would be crucial as she continued to push for justice and reform, knowing that the fight for a better future had only just begun. As the investigations into the FBI deepened, AOC's legal team was thrust into the spotlight. While they had initially been praised for their handling of the case, they now faced growing pressure to deliver results. The weight of the moment was immense, and the nation was watching closely to see if they could maintain their momentum. Public scrutiny was not only focused on AOC and the FBI, but also on the tactics her legal team employed. Critics questioned the aggressive approach they took in releasing sensitive information to the media. Some called it reckless, while others saw it as necessary to expose the depth of the corruption. AOC, however, stood firmly behind her legal team, praising their courage and determination to get to the truth. Behind closed doors, the team worked around the clock to prepare for the upcoming hearings. They gathered evidence, spoke with whistleblowers, and conducted interviews with other figures who had witnessed the FBI's actions firsthand. As the days passed, more and more individuals came forward, willing to testify about the shady practices they had been forced to carry out or witness within the FBI. The pressure on AOC's legal team reached a boiling point when new documents were leaked, showing a list of high-ranking individuals within the FBI who were allegedly involved in the smear campaign against her. The leaked list had names of prominent figures, including some who had been widely respected and seen as untouchable. This was a game-changer in the investigation, and AOC's legal team knew they had to handle this information carefully to avoid jeopardizing their case. Despite the mounting pressure, AOC's team pressed on, determined to uncover the full extent of the conspiracy. They were now more confident than ever that they could hold the corrupt agents accountable, but they also knew that it wouldn't be an easy fight. The case had escalated far beyond a personal vendetta. It had become a battle for the future of the justice system itself. With every new revelation, AOC supporters rallied behind her and her legal team. Fundraising campaigns for the legal battle surged, with donations pouring in from across the country. People believe in the cause, believe in the idea that no one, not even the most powerful individuals in government, should be allowed to break the law without facing consequences. Despite the weight of the situation, AOC remained steadfast. She made it clear in her speeches that this wasn't about political revenge. It was about restoring faith in the justice system and ensuring that every citizen was treated equally under the law. She refused to be intimidated, and with her team by her side, she vowed to continue her fight until the truth came out. However, the legal battle was far from over. The pressure to settle quickly was immense, but AOC and her legal team refused to back down. They were prepared for a prolonged fight, understanding that the outcome could impact generations to come. As the hearings loomed, the stakes grew higher. AOC's legal team faced increasing pressure from both supporters and critics, but they remained united in their mission to uncover the full extent of the conspiracy and seek justice for AOC. Their resolve was tested, but they knew they couldn't give up now, not when so much was at stake. The public's eyes were fixed on the unfolding drama, with every twist and turn covered by the media. Would AOC and her legal team succeed in their mission to expose the corruption within the FBI? Or would the powerful forces they were up against prove too formidable to defeat? As the world waited with bated breath, AOC stood as the symbol of resilience, determination, and the fight for justice. This battle wasn't just hers. It was for every citizen who believed that the truth must always come to light, no matter the cost. And the real question was, would the truth finally set her free? Or would the deep-rooted corruption within the system prove too strong to dismantle? The next few weeks would be critical in determining the future of not only AOC, but also the trust the American people placed in their government. As AOC's legal team continued to build their case, something incredible began to happen. Whistleblowers who had previously remained silent started coming forward. The revelations they shared were shocking, but they were critical in shining a light on the vast web of corruption that had plagued the FBI for years. These individuals were employees, former agents, and even high-ranking officials who had witnessed the unlawful tactics and unethical behavior firsthand. One of the first whistleblowers to speak out was a retired senior agent who had worked in the FBI's Internal Affairs Department for decades. He revealed that there had been a long-standing culture of retaliation against anyone who dared to challenge the agency's practices. He spoke of intimidation, threats, and an internal network designed to bury any wrongdoing. His testimony was damning, and it added a new layer of complexity to AOC's case. But it didn't stop there. More individuals began to share their stories, and the sheer volume of testimonies from former employees was overwhelming. They described the pressure to bend the law for political gain, the manipulation of evidence, and the use of surveillance against innocent people. Some spoke of being coerced into lying or withholding crucial information, while others revealed that they had witnessed agents falsifying reports to damage the reputations of political figures they didn't like. With each new whistleblower, AOC's team grew more confident. They now had undeniable proof that the FBI's corruption ran deep, and these testimonies were exactly what they needed to strengthen their case. But there was one problem. Many of the whistleblowers were afraid. They feared retribution not only from the FBI, but also from powerful political figures who had a vested interest in keeping these secrets hidden. It was clear that the whistleblowers were risking everything by coming forward, but they felt it was the only way to expose the truth. As the testimonies grew, AOC's team quickly realized that these whistleblowers would be key in ensuring that their case reached its full potential. They began to work closely with them, offering protection and support as they prepared to testify in court. The legal team arranged for secure locations, anonymous testimonies, and measures to ensure that the whistleblowers were shielded from any potential danger. AOC herself spoke out publicly in support of the whistleblowers. In a powerful statement, she praised their bravery and assured them that they were not alone. She urged others who knew the truth to come forward and help expose the corruption that had been festering in the FBI for so long. AOC's words resonated with the public, and many began to see the case as not just her battle, but the nation's fight for justice. The media took notice of the whistleblower revelations, and soon the story was front-page news across the country. The public outcry against the FBI grew louder as more people realized the scale of the misconduct. Citizens, long disillusioned by the growing mistrust in government institutions, began to rally behind AOC's cause. Protests were organized in support of her legal battle, and hashtags like #expose the corruption and #whistleblower justice trended on social media. But with all the public support came a new wave of attacks. AOC and her team were now not only facing the FBI's efforts to undermine the case, but also a coordinated campaign to discredit the whistleblowers. Powerful figures within the government and the media tried to silence the narrative, painting the whistleblowers as disgruntled employees with axes to grind. Yet despite the smear campaigns, the testimonies continued to flood in, and the momentum of the case only grew stronger. As the pressure mounted, AOC's team worked tirelessly to ensure the whistleblowers' testimonies were protected and that they would be given a platform to speak the truth in court. The truth was no longer just a weapon, it was a movement, and the more it spread, the harder it became for anyone to ignore. It became clear that these whistleblowers were not just the key to AOC's case, but to the larger fight for accountability within the justice system. They had opened a door to a dark chapter of history, and now the nation was watching to see if AOC's legal team could bring the full weight of justice down on those responsible for the corruption. Would the truth win out, or would the powerful figures behind the FBI's misconduct be able to bury it once again? The whistleblowers had spoken, and now it was up to the courts to decide the fate of those who had abused their power for far too long. As the case against the FBI continued to unfold, AOC's legal team had been working tirelessly to refine their strategy. With the whistleblowers providing crucial evidence and public sentiment firmly behind her, it became clear that the next phase of the trial would be the most critical yet. AOC's legal team, however, had one final card up their sleeve, a masterstroke that no one saw coming. At the heart of this new strategy was a bold move. AOC herself would take the stand in a surprise appearance during the next round of hearings. It was a move that many of her advisors had questioned, but AOC knew that her presence could sway the jury and the public opinion. She had already gained a reputation for her unapologetic style and relentless pursuit of justice, and taking the stand would show the world her commitment to the truth. On the day of her testimony, the courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. The legal team had prepared for this moment for weeks, ensuring that every detail was carefully mapped out. AOC's supporters were in the gallery, watching eagerly, while the FBI's legal team and their political allies sat stiffly across the aisle. The room was filled with tension. This was not just a trial about AOC. It had become a symbol of the fight for accountability and transparency in the justice system. AOC stood tall as she approached the witness stand, her demeanor calm but determined. The room quieted as she took her seat, the weight of the moment settling in. She began with a brief statement, acknowledging the support she had received from the public and the whistleblowers who had stepped forward. But her voice soon grew stronger, as she outlined in chilling detail the lengths to which the FBI had gone to undermine the very system it was meant to uphold. The questions from her attorney were calculated and precise, designed to expose the corruption within the FBI, piece by piece. But AOC wasn't just answering questions. She was using the opportunity to speak directly to the jury, to the press, and to the millions of people watching across the nation. She recounted the moments of intimidation and retaliation she had faced, the smear campaigns designed to discredit her, and the mounting pressure to back down. Her testimony was emotional, but was also sharp and calculated. She spoke with clarity and conviction, recalling the many moments when the truth had been intentionally suppressed. She named names and outlined the specific actions taken by high-ranking officials within the FBI to interfere with the legal process. It was a masterclass in courtroom strategy, as AOC positioned herself not just as a victim, but as a force for justice in a corrupt system. But it was when she spoke about the whistleblowers that the room truly shifted. Her voice softened, and she expressed her gratitude for their bravery in coming forward. AOC made it clear that the whistleblowers were not just crucial to her case, they were heroes who had risked everything to expose the truth. Her words resonated deeply with the jury, and many were visibly moved by her authenticity. As the defense attempted to challenge AOC's testimony, accusing her of political grandstanding, she remained unfazed. Instead, she used their attacks to further emphasize the need for reform within the FBI. She addressed the systemic issues, calling for greater oversight and accountability within the agency and promising that, win or lose, she would continue to fight for justice. The cross-examination that followed was fierce, as the prosecution tried to tear down AOC's credibility. They painted her as a partisan figure, someone out to score political points rather than seek the truth. But AOC handled every attack with grace, never flinching or backing down. She knew that the stakes were too high for her to let the FBI's lawyers derail the case. As the day came to an end, OC left the courtroom with her head held high. She had not just testified, she had made a statement. The media were buzzing with reports of her powerful performance, and the public's support for her grew stronger. The trial was no longer just about the legal proceedings, it had become a fight for the soul of the justice system. AOC's courtroom strategy had worked. She had turned a tide of the trial in her favor. The case was far from over, but the damage had been done. Her testimony had given the jury and the public a clear picture of the corruption at the heart of the FBI. The whispers of doubt that had surrounded her case were silenced, and the momentum was now firmly on her side. But even as AOC left the courtroom, she knew that this was just the beginning. The FBI and its allies were not going to let this go easily. The battle for justice had only intensified, and AOC's fight was far from finished. The real question now was, would the truth finally be enough to bring those responsible to justice? In the aftermath of AOC's riveting testimony, the media landscape was in a frenzy. News outlets across the country had picked up the story, and AOC's name was splashed across headlines everywhere. Her impassioned defense of truth and justice was being hailed as one of the most powerful moments in modern political history. From conservative to liberal outlets, the coverage was dominated by AOC's courtroom performance. Many commentators and political analysts began to describe her as a modern-day whistleblower, someone who wasn't just fighting for herself, but for the entire country. In a sea of partisan bickering, AOC had emerged as a beacon of transparency and accountability. Some even compared her to whistleblowers like Edward Snowden, noting that she had put everything on the line in pursuit of the truth. Her supporters flooded social media, rallying behind her with hashtags like #AOC4Justice and #TruthPrevails. Tweets, Facebook posts, and Instagram stories shared clips from the courtroom, where AOC had masterfully presented the facts. Videos of her most emotional moments were trending, and public sentiment quickly swelled in her favor. Many saw her as a hero for standing up against the very institution that had tried to silence her. But, as is often the case with controversial figures, the support was met with equal amounts of backlash. The FBI and its allies in the political world had not been silent. Conservative outlets went on the offensive, calling AOC's actions a publicity stunt and accusing her of using the trial for political gain. A number of pundits questioned her motives, and some even speculated that her testimony was part of a broader scheme to gain power and undermine the FBI. Meanwhile, the political establishment began to take notice. Key figures in Washington, some of whom had previously remained neutral, started to weigh in. Some expressed concerns about the damage AOC's revelations could do to the credibility of the federal justice system. Others, particularly those who had long opposed the FBI's handling of certain cases, applauded AOC's courage for exposing what they believed was a pattern of corruption within the agency. One of the most significant developments in the media frenzy was the rise of a new wave of whistleblowers, emboldened by AOC's testimony. Within hours of her speech, anonymous sources within the FBI had begun reaching out to journalists, providing additional documents and evidence of alleged misconduct within the organization. It seemed that AOC's bold stand had inspired others to come forward, all of them hoping to expose the deep-rooted issues within the FBI. Public opinion continued to shift dramatically in her favor, especially after the media coverage of her testimony. AOC's approval ratings surged, and she became an even more central figure in the national conversation. Her supporters were quick to point out that her fight was not just about herself, but about all Americans who wanted a justice system that was fair, transparent, and above reproach. Her critics, however, doubled down on their accusations, arguing that AOC had turned a serious legal matter into a media circus. In Congress, discussions about reforming the FBI were gaining momentum. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle were now calling for a comprehensive review of the agency's practices, and AOC's name was mentioned frequently in these debates. Even if the trial didn't lead to immediate results, her actions had sparked a conversation that couldn't be ignored. AOC was also becoming a lightning rod for new political movements that aimed to challenge the established order in Washington. While some on the right viewed her as a dangerous figure who threatened to destabilize the system, many on the left saw her as a champion for the voiceless. Her audacity to challenge the FBI head-on had earned her admiration among progressives, and many now viewed her as a symbol of resistance. But beyond the political ramifications, AOC's testimony had humanized the issue in a way that few could ignore. Her words had struck a chord with everyday Americans who were tired of seeing institutions, like the FBI, act without accountability. Whether it was the working class, minorities, or simply anyone who felt that the system was rigged against them, AOC's actions had resonated deeply with those who felt left behind by the establishment. In the midst of all this, a few key allies of AOC began to discuss next steps. The strategy was clear: keep the pressure on, keep the conversation going. They planned to use the momentum of AOC's public support to push for real reform, including introducing legislation to overhaul the FBI's policies and internal investigations. Their goal was not only to hold the FBI accountable for its actions, but to ensure that such corruption could never take root in the first place. As for AOC herself, she continued to be a fixture in the public eye. She gave several high-profile interviews, reaffirming her commitment to the cause. She made it clear that this fight was about more than just one trial. It was about restoring trust in the institutions that Americans relied on for justice. While the case against the FBI was far from over, it was clear that AOC's actions had set the stage for an all-out battle for accountability. The media frenzy, fueled by public support and rising political pressure, had shifted the narrative from a simple trial to a defining moment in the fight for justice. The question now wasn't just whether AOC would win her case, it was whether her crusade could fundamentally change the way justice was served in America. The next phase of the trial would be crucial. Would the momentum continue? Or would the FBI's allies manage to push back? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain: AOC had already shaken the foundations of the establishment, and she wasn't about to back down now. As the courtroom drama continued, a new and unexpected twist emerged. AOC's relentless pursuit of truth had already made waves, but it was about to break the surface in a way no one saw coming. In an unexpected and jaw-dropping moment, another key figure, someone from inside the FBI, came forward with irrefutable evidence of an undercover operation that implicated high-ranking officials within the agency. This was not just about a single instance of corruption or misconduct. This was a widespread issue involving multiple layers of deceit and cover-ups that had been concealed for years. The whistleblower, a former FBI agent, had worked in one of the most sensitive divisions of the agency. They revealed that the FBI had been involved in a series of covert operations designed not only to manipulate political outcomes, but also to tarnish the reputations of individuals who had exposed corruption within the agency. AOC's supporters had long suspected that the FBI's efforts to discredit her were part of a much larger pattern, but now there was concrete evidence to support those suspicions. The revelation rocked the courtroom, leaving the audience in stunned silence. AOC, who had been preparing for her next round of questioning, stood frozen, absorbing the magnitude of what had just unfolded. The judge, visibly shocked, slammed the gavel down to restore order, but it was clear that the gravity of the situation had overwhelmed everyone present. The prosecutors, who had been so confident in their case, now looked as though the rug had been pulled out from under them. This bombshell revelation didn't just have consequences for the FBI. It sent shockwaves throughout the entire political system. The mainstream media, which had been riding the wave of AOC's testimony, was now facing a flood of new material to report on. Stories were rushed out to cover the details of the whistleblower's testimony, and soon the story became the #1 headline across the nation. Public opinion shifted again, this time in a more drastic direction. What had started as a legal battle for AOC's freedom and political survival had evolved into an all-out battle for the soul of the justice system. Americans from all walks of life began to question whether the very institutions meant to protect them were instead serving their own agendas. In Washington, the response was swift. Legislators, particularly those aligned with AOC's platform, pushed for immediate hearings into the FBI's operations. Several senators and Congress members began drafting bills that would limit the agency's power and ensure far greater oversight and accountability. AOC, once seen as an underdog in this fight, was now being hailed as a trailblazer, a leader willing to take on the system and expose the darkest corners of American government. But the backlash wasn't far behind. Critics of AOC, particularly those who had long defended the FBI and its methods, came out in full force. They argued that this new revelation was nothing more than a politically motivated attack aimed at undermining national security. Some of her most vocal critics, including conservative pundits and former FBI agents, tried to discredit the whistleblower's testimony, claiming it was either fabricated or taken out of context. But AOC wasn't backing down. She was quick to challenge these new narratives, urging the public to trust their own judgment and not be swayed by smoke screens designed to protect powerful individuals. Behind the scenes, the fight was intensifying. AOC's legal team worked around the clock, piecing together additional evidence to build on the whistleblower's testimony. They had a clear goal: to ensure that the truth would not only come to light, but that those responsible for undermining the justice system would be held accountable. With each passing day, more former and current FBI agents began reaching out to AOC's team, offering testimony and documents that corroborated the growing evidence against the agency. As the trial continued, AOC's message was clear. The fight for justice wasn't just about one person or one case. It was about a movement that had the potential to reshape the American political landscape. Her crusade had become a rallying cry for all those who felt that the system had failed them, that the powerful and corrupt had been allowed to operate above the law for far too long. The momentum was on her side, and it was clear that the tide was turning. The public's involvement in the case was now at an all-time high. The streets were filled with protesters carrying signs that read "Justice for All" and "Expose the Corruption." AOC's supporters were not content with merely watching from the sidelines. They were actively pushing for change, demanding that the issues raised in the courtroom be addressed head-on. The hashtag Hold FBI Accountable trended for days, as citizens across the country joined the call for a fair and transparent justice system. With each passing day, the courtroom became more of a battleground, as AOC and her team fought not just for her own future, but for the future of every American who had ever felt overlooked or betrayed by the system. There were moments of intense drama, but there was also a palpable sense of hope. Hope that, for once, the people could take back control of their government and hold those in power responsible for their actions. As the trial continued, the focus shifted from a simple criminal case to a larger national conversation about justice, accountability, and the future of the FBI. The courtroom was no longer just a place of legal arguments. It had become the heart of a movement that would change the course of history. AOC was no longer just a politician. She was now a symbol of the fight against corruption and a beacon of hope for a better, more just future. The outcome of the case would determine more than just AOC's future. It would decide the fate of an entire system that had, for far too long, been unchecked.